Transition Amherst conducted a series of interviews with elders in our community in an effort to share their perspectives, knowledge, and stories about life in Amherst.
We interviewed elders Dick Stein, Alice Swift, John Kent, and Betsy Crow.
Well, I'm Dick Stein. I've been in Amherst since 1950. I did my high school studies in Brooklyn Technical High School, and I went to college in Brooklyn at Brooklyn Polytechnic, and then I went to graduate school at Princeton. Then I had a Fulbright fellowship, and I went to England and Cambridge University, studied for a year there, and then came back here. And one of the things I've done here is I came as an assistant professor of chemistry, but then I helped get the polymer program started, which people didn't know what polymers were when I first came. But now the department has been voted by U.S. News as the #1 graduate program in the country.
Fantastic.
And I helped get the polymer building funded and interacted with our congressman at the time, Silvio Conti. In the old days, UMass was primarily an agricultural school. Just before I came, it was called Massachusetts Agricultural University, and then became Massachusetts State College, and then Massachusetts Center, and then the University of Massachusetts. And when I first came, agriculture was one of the primary things. In fact, in the earlier days, we were the college in the country that was, I think, number 12 in the numbers of PhDs in agriculture that were awarded. But other aspects of the university grew since, and agriculture sort of declined in importance. But now I think it has to have a resurgence. I've had some students who came from poor backgrounds and have done very well. In fact, about 5 years ago, I met the person who became president of Monsanto, and his greeting to me was, "I was in your general chemistry class in 1952, and you gave me a D." But I think there's people like that we've produced, and then I don't think UMass has really been recognized enough for this kind of thing. One of my students has become a president of a university in Japan. Another one has become a director of an Indian Institute of Technology in India. And these people are, producing students who are now the competitors of U.S. and giving us a hard time. In one of my classes at the university, heard this explanation, and I told the class that why the sky is blue, and it was due to scattering of light by the atmosphere, and if you get above the atmosphere, the sky wouldn't be blue, it would be black. One of the people in this class was Katie Coleman, who became an astronaut, who lives in Sheldon Falls. Right. And she went up into space, and when she came back, I asked her, was I right? But, these are things that I think people have to understand more. Yes. Well, in my own family, I had a sister. She didn't go to college. She had to go to work. My father had dropped out of high school because this was after the '29 Depression, when he when he dropped out of high school. It was before that, but his family were immigrants and they couldn't afford to put him through college. But then in '29, his company failed. He lost his job, and we had to move out of our house and move in with relatives. I didn't expect I would be able to go to college, but my sister, who didn't go to college, went to work and helped support me to go. Wow. In high school, I went to a technical high school because I thought I'd have to go to work, but she helped me go to college, and I didn't have to go to work.
So this brings up
a story. When I was a graduate student, Einstein was at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, and I met him. In fact, one of my funny stories is I once told him something he didn't know, and I saw him with an unhappy look on his face, and I asked whether I could help him. He said, "Yes, where's the men's room?" But
was
that the thing you told him, or you?
Yeah. I was tempted to say absolutely or relatively. But, he has, people have asked him if he were to do it over again, what would he do? Would he do what he did? And he said, no, he thinks he'd become a plumber because he'd earn more money. But, we don't recognize people who are doing things like plumbing and carpentry and so on well enough. These are people who we need, and we should educate people with skills more. Right. At a planning meeting on Monday for this conference we're going to have on the 9th. And there were a group of about, 12 people at a potluck supper for this. And they were asked what the views are. Most of them were older people. And I was disappointed that some of the older people said, we're glad as old as we are, because we're not going to be around to face the consequences of the decline of our society. And I differed from them. I said, I hope I live longer, because then I want to see if we can make it and get people to live differently. But we have to be optimistic and try to do things. Now, whether we can do it soon enough, I don't know. I hope we can.
When we first moved here, everybody I met was new, but it was related to the university. But there were a lot of, the town was mostly made up of natives, and it was a difference of natives versus the people who had come in and were building all these new houses and changing the way the town was built. Now I think that's settled out, and some of my children's friends who were born here now are living here, and they're natives. They may be a teacher in the school or have a job. So this town gown situation has changed, and at that time all the new jobs were related to the university. Whether it was a faculty job or whether it was working in a business or profession that served the faculty members. But now there are people who live here and work outside, or they came here and they perhaps have work in their own homes, or something. They're not, the university is not attracting people the way they were in our town. So to change buses is just. But my husband bicycled to work, and during most of the year, but then in the winter, when it was too icy or too much sand on the road, then he took the bus regularly. And when it first started up, my kids were, my oldest was either in junior high or high school, and there was 2 years between the two older sons, and so they were around that age, and there was a late afternoon bus that would bring them home at 4:30, and so they could stay at school and then come home, or wherever they stayed, downtown or someplace, and then come home on that 4:30 bus. And it was very helpful. I know that a lot of parents appreciated that. But with everything, after a while, people stopped using it. Oh, well, for commuting, I do have to be sure I'd get that bus, because if I didn't, then I'd have to wait an hour. But the bus that schedule has been reduced from what it was originally. Oh, and then the other thing, of course, which also is near and dear to my heart, is the Norwottuck Rail Trail, which is wonderful for both bicycling and walking and rollerblading and taking children in strollers, and then also bicycle commuting. So it's that's something that's really changed. It's great for all kinds of recreation, and I think it's been very popular. There are a lot of people who have used it. Well, for instance, we put solar panels on our house back in about 1978, 79, because and this area, as I say, there were no trees, or at least at that time the trees were very small, and they were it was Jimmy Carter, and the federal tax exempt or benefits, so that it was economically feasible. And a lot of the houses in this area have solar panels. It's for the hot water, not for heating the house. And so we certainly were aware. I mean, I think Art was up ahead of the game on a lot of these things because he was a real naturalist. And I grew up in a family which my father was worked for the gas company, and he was always talking about how to save energy and do things the right way. And so also a gas line. Originally, all these houses were all electric because in the 1960s that was the cheapest form of energy. So, but then it became very expensive in the 70s. And so at some point the gas line was built on West Pomeroy Lane there, and Art organized the neighbors to get the line to come into Orchard Valley. So it just comes a little, a few places here and then down the street. Well, maybe we all. I think of resilience basically as sort of bouncing back, like recovering from an illness or hard times, and dealing with the ability to bounce back and deal with adversity. In terms of transition, I guess I'd say the ability to deal with problems with energy. I mean, the whole climate change issue and changes in the way we live. And I mean, the ability to be flexible, to think of new solutions. In the beginning, when we first moved here, it was a supportive community with people who tend to be mothers with small children. And then they drifted apart as the women got jobs and were busy. But last October, at the time of the snowstorm, we all were huddled in our houses with no power and no heat and no light. But different houses had different, a couple had wood stoves. There was one woman across the street who had a gas hot water heater, which did not rely on electricity. I had gas, but it depends on the electricity. She kept thinking it was going to go off, but her hot water continued to. So she offered to have me come over and take a shower, which was wonderful. And somebody else had, different people, were able to offer help, or in some cases just maybe to go out to a meal together, or it was a play. And so we were walking around this street makes a circle, and so we'd walk around, and it was the weather was relatively warm, so we could be out and just talk to people and commiserate and share stories and gossip. I mean, what we had heard about how long it was going to last and that kind of thing. But there was a lot of sharing of what we had.
Well, I've lived here for about 20 years, and I came here actually as part of a conflict resolution graduate program, to live in an experimental community and to write my thesis on that community. I learned a tremendous amount. It was a very rich experience. I learned a lot. I enjoyed the community meals quite a bit. I think they were 2 to 3 times a week. I enjoyed those. I enjoyed the community entertainment events, dances and parties. I enjoyed just running into people on the pathways. For people or animals or plants or whatever, it's the ability to be present in the moment and to adapt to the changes that occur in the moment. That's what I think resilience is. Well, I think what elders have is the perspective of seeing so many things happen over time, and the results of one thing and the results of another thing, that there's that perspective. It can help everybody because you've seen what's been done, and if you can combine that with some wisdom, whatever that means, then you get a bridge to the past, so that you can learn, so that everyone can learn from the past. Because if we don't learn from the past, then I think things tend to repeat themselves in cycles that are circular rather than a spiral cycle that leads toward more growth, I guess, evolution. I think it's crucial to have the elder perspective. So I'd call the engaged heart. The engaged heart is the hard work of learning how to get along with your friend, with your partner, with your neighbors, and in groups. The engaged heart, not just the spiritually compassionate, solitary heart.
Community. Well, there's several meanings, of course. There's just the proximity thing, the local aspect of things, but that's maybe the least important part, because to me, like, community is really about how people interact. It's really about connection and among people, and mutual aid, and how we care for each other. To me, that's the essence of community. I often think that a lot of people have their own communities inside the wider community, and so, you know, I have community of friends, you know, some close friends, and there's a lot of that connection and caring going in there. And then for me, there's my church community. I go to the First Congregational Church here, and good question, because the way our society is structured now is that we don't often even know our neighbors, don't see our neighbors, come in by our car into our garage and never come out again until we go out in our car. But it's not completely that way in my neighborhood, and I've long felt that if I prioritized getting to know my neighbors, knocking on a door, hi, and with some connection, some connecting thing, food, yeah. Or another thing is invitations to get together. I really think that I believe that people are hungry to be connected, and a lot of people are very busy, so they don't have time to do anything about that. But I think there's a hunger. What makes a sustainable and a resilient community, and the things as we go forward into the future. And I remember talking to this woman, Loda Welcome, who was a member of my church. She was in her 90s 10 years ago. She's dead now. She lived over on Fearing Street, and she had grown up in South Amherst, and she talked about how she used to take the trolley from South Amherst, her family's South Amherst farm, up to the center of town where she went to school, and down to Holyoke where they had relatives. And that made me think also of my grandmother, who grew up on a farm in Deerfield, and she and her sister took the trolley from Deerfield down to Northampton where they went to school at Smith, and then and she worked down there, and up to Greenfield. So the trolleys were a major way that people got around, because people didn't have cars. Lots of different initiatives. That's my vision of what is needed, is to have many, many people involved in many different initiatives addressing different aspects of life. Your local food people, your transportation people, all the stuff. There's so many aspects of life that might need to change. So many groups, many initiatives and projects. Local economics, stuff like that. That's one of them. But I was thinking, even more than all the concrete projects, and I really think in order to become more sustainable and resilient, we really need there to be a widely held focus on the necessity of change. And that's a tough one, because we humans, we prefer not to change unless we have to, because we've got too much to do. How can we change too? And besides, it's hard to change. But I think if there was a way that a lot of people really realize we have got to change, I'm not sure this will happen until prices or situations come up that really bring it into focus. But I think that would be an important piece. And then the other piece, I think, I've kind of addressed earlier, is I think we need a new attitude of tolerance and collaboration and respect, a willingness to be courteous in our interactions, and support and maybe help developing respectful communication among individuals and groups. Because, I was thinking, if we're just all a little less sure that we were right, and a little more humble. Nick and I, actually, we came together in '77 around our mutual interest in living the Back to the Land movement, which was big back then. we both were subscribers to Mother Earth News, and we both were reading about Scott and Helen Nearing and their living the good life stuff. Yeah, they were huge, and that was really what we had in common when we first met. And so when we first lived together, we had a garden, and it's been a learning experience. The first garden we had together, we got all this horse manure, and we just poured it on the garden, and there was so much nitrogen in the soil that we had incredible, vibrant tomato plants, but like no fruit, because the balance was off. So there was lots to learn over the years. And when our son Ben was born in 1982, we have pictures of us with little baby Ben. He was born in July. It's August. I got baby Ben on my front, and we're canning tomatoes for the first time ever. We had our first tomato canning experience together. And that was good, and it's continued on to this day. We can tomatoes every year.